Here we go. Chapter 13. Jacob was dimly aware of a sunburn-like feeling on his skin and a soreness in his throat as he reached where the bottom of the path down the mountain emptied into Obbs's platform. He had spent the entire hike down focused on how he was going to build a raft, and had been surprised he had already made it back. A decade in project management allowed him to quickly organize his thoughts and analyze requirements for the journey. In his mind, he had quickly realized the true project wasn't just to build the raft, but also had to contain all the necessary things for a successful journey to the trade post. So technically, the journey was the deliverable. He split them mentally into categories and then subdivided each, wishing he had his computer with him to help plan. He intended to ask Obbs about each point. He had already iterated on it a few times, and his current plan was this, listed in importance within each category. So first, raft. Construction tools, buoyancy, binding, sail, oars, storage, occupants. Supplies, food and water for 7 days. Fishing, clothing for sun protection, map, medical supplies, tools, weapons, trade, needs something valuable for bartering at the trade outpost. Is there anything Obbs could part with? Are there any flora or fauna on the island? Is there anything of value in the supplies from the crash? Information, journey specific. Is there anything or is there any writing tools or paper? What dangers might they encounter? Are there any sources of food or water during the journey? Is there anything of value that might be collected on the trip? Any trade outpost specific information, survival recommendations, and information about the Naga. And then if time allowed, he thought he would ask about more general knowledge of the world. Knowledge about leveling, skills, magic, nearby nations, factions. Normally, he would have handed this list off to his team for discovery, which is a phase of planning involving information gathering. But it was just him, and there was no time to lose. He had already wasted half the day. His top priority was to get started gathering materials as soon as possible, which meant he didn't have time to ask about everything. It would be best if Obbs had some kind of writing tool and he could write down his questions quickly and then have Obbs answer them in writing to be reviewed later. As he approached the entrance, he saw Obbs outside. He was holding what looked like a piece of parchment. Obbs, we saw people from the crash on the other island. They're alive. Jacob was speaking quickly and with a pace of urgency. Obbs raised his eyebrows. Jacob pointed at the parchment. Is that the map? Alive? Well, I'll be. Yeah. This is it. Here. Obbs looked a little taken aback by Jacob's energy, but handed it over. Wow, Obbs, this is exactly what I need. Here, I put it right into the Word document. That's the map that he made. Now what I'll do is I'll put it on the side so I can keep reading and you guys can look at it. At a glance, the map showed all the major islands between here and the trade post. He noticed Ina had caught up and was also peering at the map with curiosity. More importantly, that meant that Obbs had parchment and ink. Jacob continued. Okay, Obbs, you said you would help me build the raft. I'm going to take you up on that. I have a plan in mind and a ton of questions I need to ask you, but we are short on time. The most helpful thing you can provide now is information. Can you lend me a writing tool and a piece of parchment? Actually, why don't I just use the back of the map? Obbs furrowed his brow. Okay. Let me get a quill and some ink. Jacob cleared a patch of dirt and took his shirt off, placing it on the ground first so the map wouldn't get dirty. As soon as Obbs returned with a small ceramic jar of ink and a quill, Jacob got to work. Took him a few tries to get the knack for dipping the quill and writing with it, but soon he was hastily scrawling his questions, leaving spaces for Obbs's responses. Then he blew over the ink to help it dry. He got up off the ground and handed it to Obbs. Obbs held it and started to read. Apparently, the fact that it was written in English was no barrier to him, and he opened his mouth to start answering the first part, but Jacob jumped in. It's okay. Don't give me the answers now. Write them after I leave. What I need to know for now is, do you have wood, cloth, nails, rope, or any tools that can cut or chop, like a saw or an axe? I only have a few pieces of wood for burning. I do have some blankets, and I might be able to spare some. No nails here and no rope. Though there are some vines on the island that will probably be strong enough. I've been using an old Naga scimitar when I need to gather my own wood. I think it has an enchantment to stay sharp. I'll let you borrow it. Jacob nodded. Why don't you grab that now, and then I'll head down to the cove. Obbs left and returned, holding a surprisingly long, curved blade. The blade was some kind of black metal, and as Jacob reached out to grab it, he noticed the hilt was some kind of blue sandpaper feeling material. Maybe coral, he thought. He looked closer and saw that it was engraved with a bunch of tiny whirlpool filigree. He also noticed a tiny red gem had been inlaid into the center of the sword guard. Obbs, this looks way too fancy to chop trees with. Are you sure I can use this? Obbs gave his toothy grin, and Jacob couldn't help but notice Ina had leaned in, eyes wide, gazing at the weapon. It's fine. Just don't let the Naga see it. They get a little prickly when they see other races wielding one of their tide swords. Okay. Jacob gave it a few test swings and then gently tapped the curved edge with his finger, and was surprised when a thin line of red appeared. It hadn't hurt at all. Obbs chuckled at Jacob's surprise. Like I said, enchanted. Be careful where you point that thing. Jacob nodded. Okay, before I go, you don't happen to know if a certain kind of tree or plant around here is more buoyant, do you? Buoyant? That floats better? Obbs shook his head. No idea. Okay. Jacob looked at the sun, now starting its descent. I'm headed to the cove. I'm going to try to figure it out, I guess. Obbs nodded. Take Ina with you. She's also agreed to help out. Ina stared at Obbs and narrowed her eyes, but as Jacob left for the cove, she followed. The scimitar was incredibly effective at chopping into the thin trees and plants on the island. On arriving at the cove, Jacob was happy to find that the items he had set aside from the crash were still there. He decided to task Ina with walking the beach to see if there was anything else that had washed up, especially any of the seat cushions or clothing. Then he had decided the first order of business was to identify the most buoyant tree. Close to the water, there was only 3 different kinds that had any kind of thickness to them. While not identical to plants he had seen before, they had similarities to earth plants. There were palm trees, a kind of tree that looked like balsa, and then some bamboo-like plants that were just on the edge of how thin he thought would be viable. He simply chopped down one of each, dragged it over to the cove, and then pushed them into the water. The palm tree felt the heaviest as he dragged it over and dipped the lowest into the water. The palm tree felt the heaviest as he dragged it over and dipped. Oh, and it also dipped the lowest in the water under its own weight. The bamboo was easily staying on the surface, but was thin, which meant a lot more effort would be required because he would need to arrange it in bundles. The balsa seemed the best. It wasn't as heavy as the palm and seemed to easily stay on the surface. Jacob tested by applying some gentle pressure. While it wasn't scientific, he didn't have the time for anything more advanced. He decided to focus on gathering the balsa. Luckily for him, there were a couple dead ones that had already fallen down not too far from the water. He tried to focus grabbing the logs that were about 1 foot wide to try to keep them uniform. Once he had 6 logs gathered by the shore, he decided it was time to go look for some vines. He took a minute to rest and brushed some wood fragments off of his sweat-drenched shirt His arms and back were sore and he was tired, but he thought the worst of the physical labor was over. Then, with a quiet groan, he got up and started walking inland. He quickly saw some trees that had a vine here or there, mostly out of reach or they looked too skinny and weak, but then he saw it. A tree that was completely covered in thick vines, almost like mummy wrappings. Some of the vines extended out from the tree on the ground as though reaching other new trees to link to. He knew back on Earth that some vines were almost predatory in how they would completely enclose other plants and strangle them of nutrition. The tree it was around must have been large, because with the vines on top, it was around 6 feet wide. As he approached, he smelled something sickly sweet in the air that reminded him of fruit. His stomach growled and reminded him that he still hadn't eaten anything since arriving at the island. He looked around but didn't see any fruit growing on any of the plants. I need to make sure I find something tonight, he thought. He stepped over one of the vines on the ground and looked at where it connected to the mass on the tree. He didn't notice the slight quiver as he approached. Holding the scimitar firmly, he chopped at the vine. He quickly noted 3 things. A large spray of purple fluid came forth as though he had cut an artery. A loud shrieking sound all around him and movement as the vine started to thrust towards him. What the fuck? He immediately stepped back and right onto another vine that quickly rolled around his ankle. He screamed and lashed out with the scimitar. It severed the vine and released more purple liquid. He tried to take another step but tripped and had to scramble to get up. Another vine wrapped around his left arm and he started to slash at it, but his swing was stopped halfway as a third vine grabbed his wrist and he dropped the scimitar. Then a fourth around his legs, and then he was trapped. It slowly started to reel him back towards the mass. He wasn't sure what was about to happen, but he imagined it would not be good. Ina! Help! He shouted. As it dragged him closer, part of the mass of vines retracted, revealing a huge yellow flower, which might have been pretty if the center wasn't a huge hollow opening with green mucus dripping out of it. Then it shrieked and he felt a blast of warm air hit him along with a powerful sickly sweet scent. No. No. Ina! It continued to reel him in until he was at the base of the mass and the vine started to lift him up toward the flower. Some of the green mucus started to drip onto him, and where it made contact with his body, he went numb. One of his arms got hit by a big glob, and within seconds, he couldn't move it or resist at all. Eventually, he was completely off the ground, and he could only look and kick his legs as he was pressed into the mouth head first. The inside was lined with what looked like hundreds of red thorns. He screamed. Then suddenly, the thing started screaming again, and the vines holding him went slack. His arms dropped uselessly down and dragged against the red thorns in the mouth as he kicked his legs outside, extracting himself, falling backwards and hitting the ground hard. Outside, the whole mass of vines was shaking violently, and he saw the scimitar was buried in the top of the yellow flower, and there was something there, a shimmering outline of a person. Run! A feminine voice shouted, and he saw the outline grab the hilt with both hands and slide off the giant flower, pulling the scimitar in a deep cut all the way through and out the bottom, spraying purple liquid everywhere. A splash hit the translucent figure in the head, which suddenly became solidly outlined in purple. Jacob ran. He got 30 feet before turning, gasping for breath. He turned and saw the translucent figure quickly become more solid, colors shifting into... Ina? Jacob was stunned. How did you... Thank you so much. Jacob was almost euphoric with his near-death experience, and before Ina could react, he stepped forward and went to pull her into a hug. But he had forgotten one thing. His arms were still paralyzed. So instead, he awkwardly fell off balance, careening into her, his head bumping off of hers as she collapsed under his weight. What are you? Ow! Get off of me! Ina yelled. Jacob quickly started to roll off of her. Sorry, my arms are paralyzed. Hey, you can talk! As Jacob rolled, he felt his head go over something rubbery and looked at her head where the purple liquid had hit her. Instead of her usual brown hair were small, purple juice-covered tentacles, and they were wriggling. Ina! It infected you! You've got tentacles!